let me just, there we go. Okay. Well, the world population is increasing, but what's key to this answer is that it's a bit complex. It's actually increasing at a decreasing rate, right? So even though we have continued increase every year, what's happening is that the growth rates annually are continuing to decline because of that fertility decline. And so we have fewer people added as we go along throughout. So overpopulation is not necessarily a myth. It's just that it's a little more complex than that. It's that it's not that we can't support the number of people that we have globally. It's that the distribution of resources is not necessarily equitable across the world, right? So some places are actually overcrowded and other places have plenty of land and plenty of resources, right? So it's really the distribution of things that is more of the problem. Well, what's really interesting is that it's already happening that we have about half of the world's population concentrated in the poorest countries in the world. And this is mainly countries in Africa, sub-Saharan Africa, and some parts of Asia where fertility rates remain very high. So this is quite different. We used to have a lot of population concentration historically in the northern hemisphere. Now it's concentrated in the global south. And so that's where we have some concerns about overcrowding and lack of resources. It's really due to the continued high fertility rates. So especially in places like sub-Saharan Africa and some other countries in the world, you have continued fertility of, on average, 4, 5, 6 children per woman in some countries. And so that continued growth rate, that continues to make the population grow at a higher rate. In other countries, like in Western Europe, Japan, the United States, we have very low fertility. In some countries, we see fertility of only about 1 child per woman on average. And so that's why we have actually declining population in Western Europe, for example, which is a very different scenario than what we see in sub-Saharan Africa. Yeah, in sub-Saharan Africa, we have seen fertility decline in many places. It's just a matter, there are a lot of reasons why fertility remains high. So you have cultural reasons. People value large families for religious or other cultural reasons. You know, families are tied to having a number of children is tied to wealth, right, in many traditional societies. But the problem is that a lot of governments have not invested enough in family planning. So there's actually a lot of places where women prefer to have smaller families, but they have not been able to achieve that because they don't have access to affordable and safe contraceptive use, right? So this can be the issue in some of these countries, whereas you see in Western Europe, affordable, safe contraceptives are available widely. And, you know, there's also economic change that has happened, right, with women entering the workforce workforce, and with working outside the home, they're less likely to have as many children. Well, I think really what we see here is two things. There's two main factors that affect the population change. One is mortality or death, and one is fertility or growth, right? Birth, right? And so we've seen declining mortality as we have increased numbers of vaccinations, better sanitation, a lot of different things that are spreading across the world everywhere, although it's more obvious in the richer countries, but it's still happening everywhere. That leads to increased longevity. So people are living longer, children are living into adulthood and then living longer lives overall. We have continued high fertility, which a lot of high birth rates in some of these areas, like sub-Saharan Africa, for example, but it is on the decline. So we have seen decline. It's just slower than what we've seen in previous in other regions that had previously gone through this decline. So what we have to see is, in terms of future population growth, is how fast will that fertility continue to decline, and also how can we, on a larger scale, right, on a broader question is how can we provide services for these growing populations in order to make sure that people are not just reproducing, right, but that they're living healthy lives. Well, if you talk to the population ecologists and biologists, they suggest some estimates. It depends, varies quite widely. So they range from about 4 billion to about 16 billion, right? And these are estimates people have made based on food needs, energy needs, et cetera, water needs. But it really is going to depend on future consumption patterns and on technological change. And so as long as the richer countries continue to consume at very high rates. We live in the United States, we have sort of a disposable lifestyle in many respects, right? We've improved in terms of recycling, but we're still burning a lot of fossil fuels. We use cars for transportation, almost everybody. We eat a lot of meat, for example, which takes up a lot of resources. If we were to see more people go vegetarian, for example, that would actually reduce our consumption globally, and it would increase the availability of resources for more people. Technological change is another possibility, and we've seen this many times in the past. We've seen that we've improved irrigation systems, for example, so that people were able to grow crops where they couldn't before. We see lots of scientists working on things like growing crops under the sea. You see Elon Musk talking about, inhabiting the moon, right, and going to take more people there. So it's not impossible that we could have a massive technological change that would actually make it more sustainable for more people. Thank you very much. I hope it's helpful. Okay, great. Thank you very much. You too. Bye-bye.